They laughed when she offered to cook dinner, until the first bite revealed the 10-time culinary champion they'd been mocking all night. James Collins stood in his expansive penthouse kitchen, surveying the chaos with growing panic. The caterer had called just 30 minutes ago with a family emergency, leaving him stranded with 15 hungry guests and nothing but raw ingredients. This dinner party was supposed to impress several potential donors for his upcoming charity gala, and now it was falling apart before his eyes. "Does anyone here cook?" he asked desperately, looking around at his gathered friends. Most shook their heads or averted their eyes. These were executives, lawyers, and socialites, people who ordered in or had personal chefs. "I've been known to put together a meal or two," said a quiet voice from the back. The group parted to reveal Margaret Chen, a new administrative assistant from James's office. She had been invited as a last-minute replacement when his colleague backed out. Margaret was dressed simply compared to the others, a modest black dress instead of designer labels, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. Someone snickered. Robert Whitman, James's business partner, raised an eyebrow. "You're volunteering to cook for 15 people at a moment's notice?" "I'm sure I can manage something with what you have," Margaret replied evenly. James looked at her simple appearance and hesitated. But with no other options, he gestured toward the kitchen. "Well, if you think you can help, be my guest." A few guests exchanged amused glances. This was going to be entertaining, if nothing else. "I'll need about an hour," Margaret said, already rolling up her sleeves and examining the ingredients laid out on the counter. "An hour? The caterer was planning a 5-course meal," James protested. Margaret simply smiled. "I'll see what I can do." As the guests returned to their cocktails and conversations, Margaret moved through the kitchen with unexpected precision. Her hands flew over ingredients, chopping, seasoning, and adjusting heat levels with practiced efficiency. Where others might have seemed frantic, she was focused and calm, occasionally humming to herself. James peeked in after 20 minutes, surprised to find the kitchen transformed. What had been chaos was now an organized production line. Delicious aromas were already beginning to fill the air. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, genuinely curious now. "Just fine," Margaret replied without looking up, her attention on a reduction sauce she was stirring. "There's a decent wine collection in your cellar. The Barolo would pair nicely with what I'm making." James blinked in surprise. "You know about wine pairings?" "A little," she said with a small smile that suggested more than her words conveyed. In the living room, Robert was entertaining the guests with jokes at Margaret's expense. "Poor James, having to serve us whatever his secretary can microwave," he laughed. "Maybe we should order pizzas as backup." But as the first dishes emerged from the kitchen, the laughter died away. Margaret had somehow produced an elegant starter of seared scallops with a citrus reduction, plated beautifully on James's finest china. The guests fell silent as they tasted the perfectly cooked seafood. "This is incredible," whispered Sophia Reynolds, a notorious food critic who happened to be among the guests. She studied the plate with newfound interest. The balance of flavors, the texture. As course after exquisite course emerged from the kitchen, the mood in the penthouse shifted from condescension to confusion to genuine admiration. By the time Margaret presented a dessert of deconstructed Black Forest gâteau with hand-pulled sugar decorations, James couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "Margaret, where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked as appreciative murmurs spread through the room. She smiled modestly. "I've had some training." "Some training?" Sophia Reynolds interjected. "This is Michelin star-level cuisine. The technique in that salmon dish alone was masterful." Robert, who had been noticeably silent since tasting the main course, suddenly snapped his fingers in recognition. "Chen? Margaret Chen. Why does that sound familiar?" He pulled out his phone and began searching, his eyes growing wider by the second. "Oh my God," he finally said, looking up at Margaret in astonishment. "You're Monsieur Chen." The room went silent. "M. Chen?" James repeated, confused. "Margaret Chen," Robert explained, his voice filled with awe. 10-time international culinary champion, former executive chef at Le Ciel in Paris, the youngest chef ever to receive 3 Michelin stars. Her cookbook sold millions of copies worldwide before she mysteriously stepped away from the spotlight 5 years ago. He looked at Margaret in bewilderment. "But what are you doing working as an administrative assistant?" All eyes turned to Margaret, who was calmly clearing plates. Margaret set down the stack of dishes and faced the room of stunned faces. For the first time that evening, her posture changed. Shoulders back, chin raised slightly. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. This was not just Margaret, the assistant. This was Chef Chen. "After my husband died," she explained quietly, "I couldn't bear to be in restaurant kitchens anymore. We had planned to open our own place together." She paused, collecting herself. The competitive cooking world felt hollow without him. I needed something different, something practical, structured. Office work gave me that. "But your talent," Sophia said, still astonished. "It's a crime to keep it hidden," Margaret smiled. "Who says it's hidden? I cook every day, for my family, for community events. Just because there's no camera crew or critics doesn't mean the joy isn't there." James looked mortified. "If I had known." "You would have treated me differently," Margaret finished for him. "And I didn't want that. I've enjoyed being just Margaret from accounting who brings good lunches to work." "Well, you can't go back to being just Margaret now," Robert said. "Not after this meal." The next morning, James called Margaret into his office. She entered cautiously, unsure what to expect after last night's revelation. "I owe you an apology," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "Not just for last night, but for underestimating you these past months." "There's no need to apologize," Margaret replied. "I wasn't exactly forthcoming about my background. Nonetheless, I have a proposition for you." James slid a folder across his desk. "The charity gala next week benefits culinary education for underprivileged youth. We've been struggling to find a headliner chef for a cooking demonstration." He smiled hopefully. "After last night, I can't think of anyone better." Margaret hesitated, her fingers lingering on the folder without opening it. "You don't have to answer right away," James added quickly. "And I understand if you're not ready to step back into the spotlight." "It's not that," Margaret said thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about teaching again, passing on what I know." She opened the folder, scanning its contents. "These kids. They remind me of why I fell in love with cooking in the first place." "So you'll do it?" "On one condition," Margaret replied, a spark returning to her eyes. "I stay in my current position. No special treatment, no chef's title. I'm not ready to be Chef Chen full-time again." "Done," James agreed without hesitation. "Though I can't promise others won't treat you differently once word gets out." The story reaches its climax, focusing on Margaret's journey toward rediscovering her passion for cooking, albeit on her own terms. The charity gala, which Margaret was initially hesitant about, turns out to be a resounding success. Her cooking demonstration not only draws a massive crowd, 3 times the expected number, but it also serves as a public reintroduction to her immense culinary skills. Despite her desire to live a quieter life, away from the limelight, the buzz surrounding her as Chef Chen quickly spreads, thanks to the success of her demonstration. However, Margaret's true joy comes not from the accolades, but from teaching the next generation of aspiring chefs. As she works closely with the young students, guiding them through the basics of knife skills and flavor balancing, she finds a deep sense of fulfillment that reconnects her with the very reasons she fell in love with cooking in the first place. After the demonstration, one of the event's guests, food critic Sophia Reynolds, approaches Margaret acknowledging her still formidable abilities in the kitchen. She suggests that Margaret should consider returning to the restaurant world, even offering her connections to investors who would back her in a heartbeat. Margaret, however, takes a moment to reflect and responds thoughtfully, signaling that she's not ready to dive back into that world. Instead, she finds contentment in her current path, teaching the youth, working her day job, and cooking on her own terms. Her decision highlights her evolving perspective on what truly matters to her, using her talents to empower others without the pressures of fame or competition. The story then shifts to the office the following Monday, where the atmosphere has subtly changed. Margaret is no longer just the quiet administrative assistant. She's now viewed through the lens of admiration, even awe, by her colleagues. Despite the newfound attention, she remains grounded, continuing her routine with the same humility and focus she always had. When lunchtime arrives, her co-workers, intrigued by her cooking prowess, gather around as she shares a simple homemade curry. This small gesture, once overlooked, is now seen in a new light as they realize the exceptional quality of her cooking. As the co-workers savor her meal, they come to understand that Margaret's talent extends beyond the culinary world. Her generosity of spirit, her humility, and her quiet strength make her not just a world-class chef, but also an extraordinary individual. James, who had witnessed the transformation in Margaret from the sidelines, reflects on how she embodies the qualities that make people truly remarkable. In the end, the story leaves readers with the poignant realization that true greatness doesn't need to be flaunted or validated by others. It simply exists in the quiet moments, in the hidden talents that only emerge when the time is right. Margaret's story serves as a testament to the power of staying true to oneself and finding fulfillment in the things that truly matter.